moving down to interact with this meeting through video. And anybody who is currently online has figured that out. And anybody who wants to in the future can get a hold of Sarah Dector or anyone at the City of Flagstaff's planning team. Our public comment protocol. We take public comment, written conditions of public comment can be sent to the email regionalplanningcommittee@flagstaffaz.gov. There will be time for spoken comments, but it'll really just be introductions of the people who want to come and interact with our meeting. We have such a big committee that we don't really necessarily want to take up a large swath of time for verbal comments, but we would really encourage the public to write in their comments and also come visit with us and hang out at our meeting. We're moving on to roll call number 2, and I guess we'll just start from the top of the list.
I've got that, Anthony.
Go for it.
Sarah Allen. Maybe she's joined us. Allie Aplin,
Here.
Paul Byer,
Here.
Tina Berger,
Here.
Alicia Chi. Tilling.
Here.
Jesse Delmar. Abe Estrella,
Here.
Dirk Foreman,
Here.
Anthony Garcia,
Present.
Susie Garrettson. Here. David Hayward's excused. Michelle James.
Here.
Julie Lee,
Here.
Andrea Moronic. Rick Miller,
Here.
Tom Pearson,
Here.
Walter Phelps,
Here.
Kim Robinson,
Here on Zoom.
John Ruggles,
Here.
John Van Landingham,
Here.
Diane Bosick is absent, is that correct? Yep. Al White
Right in. and
Christine Bella.
I'm here on Zoom.
And for some reason, the audio is supposed to be coming out of those speakers, but now it's just coming out of this computer, so I'm gonna adjust something here before we keep going.
That's fine. We'll keep on rolling with this.
Yep.
Start off, like the back does the most presenting meetings with the Indigenous Land Acknowledgement. And that is, the City of Flagstaff humbly acknowledges the ancestral homelands of this area's Indigenous nations and original stewards. These lands, still inhabited by native descendants, border mountains sacred to Indigenous peoples. We honor them, their legacies, their traditions, and their continued contributions. We celebrate their past, present, and future generations who will forever know this place as home. Now we'll be moving on to number 4, which is the review and revisions of the Regional Plan Committee proposed scheduling. Staff, do we have anything for that? For number 4?
Sorry, that's me. Just 1 second.
What's your number fast? So what we'll be really doing here as a committee is just the review and update of the version of the document, schedule and review of potential boards, commissions, and councils that may be invited to review the chapters of this draft and advance and in advance of the committee meetings. The staff liaison has already requested reviewers from Parks and Recreation and Open Space Commissions from the city and county due to the scheduling for their review. Sarah, do you have any?
Yeah, let me get this up
Okay.
so I can share it. If it is does, let me share my screen.
Take your time.
All right, here we go. So, a couple things, we sent out this document, which is our rough schedule for committee review. This is our last committee meeting before we actually start reviewing chapters. So tonight, we're going to talk a little more about how that's gonna come together and some important decisions we're gonna have to keep in mind through that process. Some things I wanted to point out on the schedule you received is we are proposing to flip a part of the schedule that was originally proposed in December and talk about water resources and energy before we do the preferred scenario review and endorsements. And that is largely because of just the production time and then that need to have some additional reviews for the preferred scenario. We'll talk about initial findings for scenario choosing today. Another piece that was added by comment of the committee is on the July 10th meeting. I had a request that we make sure we actually go through the entire parking lot, which is something we discussed in our guidelines as a committee before, and that be agendized for the July 10th meeting. So I've done that as well. So I just wanted to make everyone aware of those changes, first of all. And then second, all names and titles for parts of the plan are very much a work in progress, and we'll talk about that a little more tonight. And so some of the names are tentatively updated in terms of chapter names. And so I will keep this document up to date and send it to you when there are changes, with it looking like this with the highlights. None of the dates have changed since we talked about it. Per the request of the committee, I populated the boards and commissions column of this table for committee reviewers with the commissions that are most likely to have overlap with that chapter. That the only commissions I have contacted is open space and parks and recreation, because the commissions need enough notice to identify who their reviewers will be before we submit chapters. And since those chapters are going out for review in February, we needed to get some information to them earlier. But that rest of the column is at the discretion of this committee. It is completely optional for the committee to request reviews from other boards and commissions. This is the group that's been appointed to conduct reviews, and really adding commissions and boards is largely about filling gaps that you feel you need in terms of input and process and that you think would benefit the process. As the person who's managing the reviews, I would offer the thought that there are already over 100 reviewers. And so, for example, in the resource stewardship and resilience chapter, which was 10 pages long, there were already over 104 comments. So I ask you to exercise some discretion on if you actually need the additional reviewers, or if the staff and the committee sufficiently understand the issues in a way where they can make sure everything relevant has been released. Simply from a span of control, if we get to where there's 200 reviewers or something, it just gets a little harder for management. It can slow down our process, and we already do have a pretty aggressive line that we would like to meet. So that's kind of my feedback on that, and to put this up on excuse me. I, like all those joining online, have been sick for like a month, so welcome to cold and flu season. Need to like discuss this and let you guys add commissions or take them off, whatever you think is appropriate. So that's probably the first discussion item. Maybe we take 5 or 10 minutes and share any edits you have for me on this.
Yeah, so first, I just want to kind of ask the group if anybody just has any ideas on anything that was said just now, or how do we feel about keeping the inclusion of others down to the bare necessities, or the ones that we need the most? I see some heads shaking if that's a good idea. Susie, do you have any ideas on this yet, or still thinking about it? Yeah, there's the one commission I wanted to get involved was the Indigenous Commission. They've already been reached out to with the plan and participation in the plan until now, that correct?
We somewhat, yes. I mean, there's certainly, we've done presentations to them just like every other commission.
Yeah.
Is there, I mean, every commission is going to get a visit from staff during the 60-day public review.
Right, so I'm thinking that that will be enough during that interaction with that committee in particular. If you could just make sure that they know that they're welcome to be here and to let them know that, at least myself really values their input when it comes to, what their ideas are on the region. And then Michelle?
Yeah, we're not talking about removing any of the ones that are already.
No.
That is up to you.
This is a discussion part.
Yeah,
So I guess we could, if you wanted to.
I was just wondering, I wasn't opposing that at all.
Okay.
But growth and land use has two acronyms used for their. Definitions here.
Oh.
We're gonna look at CHAC and BHAC. Can you tell me what those are?
the CHOC is the Chicano and Hispanic Advisory Council, and the ADAC is the African Diaspora Advisory Council. Both are with the county. You'll remember I gave you guys the list of the 26 boards and commissions that are out there. And so, but and your question is staff looking for feedback if any of you should come off the list? Yes, that is totally in the scope of this conversation. Yeah, you're not proposing it, but I just wanted to make sure people knew you could.
Right, can I just speak to you?
Yes,
Go ahead.
please.
My only thought was if those two commissions you just told me about, that are averaged out, are gonna be looking at the growth and land use chapter, maybe you can add indigenous community for the city. That would seem like it would be a good place in what's already there.
Would you want it to be both the county's IPAC and the Indigenous Commission?
I would.
Yeah, that
I
sounds
have
good.
for the county.
Branch. of the
Yeah.
county.
Since no doubt.
And when we're talking about this kind of outreach, are you guys good with them just getting like the materials prior to the meeting as well?
Well, and there's two ways they could be invited. They could be invited like the commission members who signed up as the committee members that have signed up to be like early reviewers and be invited to that early review. Or we could send them your committee packet and invite them to this meeting to have discussions with you. That, if you want to clarify which of those you prefer, or if you want those two strategies used at different times or thoughts on that, that'd be great too.
Janine?
It seems like the second option provides more input, provides a space for more input from their.
While I do agree with that, I also want to question, so we established that input would be more beneficial for the group of this size if it's written. So I'm wondering if we couldn't just send the packets to them as we are, get them along with the invitation. So that way they don't feel like they have to come in order to participate. They can still participate.
Nice things, yeah.
Susie?
I just wanted to ask Sarah, did you get my email about the reviewers from the committee?
Yes, I saw that you had ones that you weren't showing up on.
Yeah, and I'm not on there still, so you'll. get
Yes,
that.
no, but yeah, because I didn't make any changes to it after I sent it out, but I did get that comment from you. I will.
And we are meeting on February 21st.
Correct. So I think, Susie noticed that her name wasn't on some of the reviews she signed up for, and she sent me an email with which ones she was missing from. I'm sorry, I don't know why I didn't write down Susie in the right place, but if anybody else thinks that's the case, I'd ask you to do the same thing, send me an email. And I'll make sure your name is on the list.
Yeah, it looks like we got some pretty full lists on all of them, except for back. So,
Yeah, no one's as excited about implementation strategies and monitoring as we are.
I just didn't understand what that means.
I signed up for it.
Did you? Oh, Susie.
So,
That's right, it was in your email.
Yeah.
Michelle?
Too. Well, there's two.
There we go.
And if you guys now can look at that list and see if anything that you guys want to be on currently, the transportation, infrastructure, energy, water resource, that you're not on that list, speak up now, we can get that taken care of real quick. We good?
I'll go on infrastructure.
Okay. Everybody else all right? And it looks like the discussion has somewhat ceased amongst us, so we'll be moving on to the next, to letter B, number 4. Coordination with the land availability and suitability study and the code analysis process. Michelle?
Well, Vice Sarah's pulling it up. I'm Michelle McNulty. I'm the planning director for the city. I've actually been online, so I've kind of been, watching this group and, not in a creepy way, but just participating. So I've seen a lot of you online, so it's really nice to meet the ones that I haven't met in person yet today. So really nice to meet you all. So yeah, I'm co-leading with myself, Tiffany Antal, the zoning code manager, Genevieve Parathry with sustainability, and Jennifer Michelson with housing, the land availability, suitability, and code analysis project, which we lovingly refer to as the last cap. So this is a multi-pronged initiative to address critical long-term planning and resilience needs. And as I mentioned, it's a partnership between planning, housing, sustainability, and Mountain Line is also participating, considering that, we have a climate emergency, a housing emergency, and our council, the city council has really shifted the big shift, which is a different way of thinking about transportation. So that's why Mountain Line is also part of this project. It's providing a much needed base for high level coordination between various city divisions. And I'll speak more about why that is later in the presentation. But it's a super coordinated approach with planning, and not just planning, housing, and sustainability, but with engineering, specifically development engineering and transportation, fire, building safety, economic vitality, water services, and others as appropriate. So the scope of this is that it's kind of the last part of it, the land availability, is really identifying what land is available in Flagstaffs, and what are the development potentials and what are the barriers. And then the code analysis is really an in-depth development code. And so it's not just zoning code, it's literally any code that touches a development project through the lens of the declared housing emergencies. I'm sorry, housing and climate emergencies. And then we're really focused on what's working and what's not. And the reason why we're doing those two things in conjunction is because we want to make sure that the solutions are right sized for Flagstaff's problem. If we don't know what our barriers are, then we're not going to make the appropriate code changes to really make a difference in moving the needle in the direction that we're trying to go. This is a highly coordinated project. We've had different focus groups with developers, the design community, and other interested groups, really trying to understand from either a project financing standpoint and just using the codes, kind of what are the barriers that people are coming up against. We are visiting a series of different advisory committee meetings, as well as planning and zoning, and then the commission and city council. And then this group, and we have a slide at the end that will talk about how this effort is really complementary to the regional plan effort. So for the last, just a quick overview, why are we doing it? Well, we have limited land left to develop, and we have a lot of needs, and so we need to get it right. It also provides that context that I was talking about for recommending the right codes as we update our zoning code and all of our development codes. So it's doing a land analysis. The idea is that we were trying to identify about 50 opportunity sites. An opportunity site just means that maybe it's a greenfield development, which means it hasn't been developed, but maybe there's a lot going on in the area that would make it ripe to see some new development in it. It could also be underdeveloped, so it's about 10%. So if there is development on it, it's about if the building is 10% of the value of the land, that's kind of identified as being probably ripe for redevelopment and investment. And then that suitability analysis is really that evaluation of the constraints, doing a gap, an infrastructure gap analysis. So, are these areas that are ripe for redevelopment, are they lacking transportation connections, you know, utilities, with the utilities need to be upgraded, kind of regionally getting an understanding of where we have to really focus improvements. And then it's also looking at a regional cost reduction strategies. And then really the outcome will be this vacant residential land report. Even though we're looking at all lands, we're really focusing on the barriers for residential development, but we really want to be cognizant of not giving up our other lands like commercial and industrial if we have needs for those for our employment growth. So this is the project boundary. So the gray shaded area is the city of Flagstaff boundaries. The city of Flagstaff, and then the kind of hatched is the urban growth boundary, and then the red is just the project boundary. So we do go up a little bit into Tony. There is an activity site up there, so we want to look at that. And then a little bit of areas outside of the city. So far what the land inventory is really telling us that most of the opportunity sites are really within our own Flagstaff boundaries and not that growth boundary. But we didn't want to miss any opportunities. So then the code analysis process or analysis, why are we doing this? Well, we have development codes that are key for achieving housing and climate goals. So when we talk about the implementation strategies of the regional plan, that leads into exactly what we're talking about. And so I think this graphic is a really great summary of what's happening. We have these plans and policies that call for bold and urgent action. We have this idyllic community that we really want to see, but we have these various codes that are almost working in conflict with one another. They're not functioning as that effective tool of actually implementing our plans and our policies. And then within those codes, they might even be prioritizing other things over housing and climate, which is getting in the way of achieving, the housing and climate emergency. And then all of these have kind of been written in different timeframes. So there are different contexts where there might have been different priorities at a time. And so they're not working together. Next slide. So just to kind of put a finer point on it, it's almost like a Rubik's Cube. We're trying to get all the pieces to fit so that it does make a nice package of working that holistic analysis. And so, just right now, codes are a patchwork of regulations that are spread against various different titles, different documents with different departments, with different needs and priorities that are trying to implement that all in one project. And then the different standards, everybody's taken, they've updated their codes at different times. So some, engineering standards might not have been updated since 1990. And the zoning code is 2011, which doesn't seem very old, but I mean, a lot's changed in the last 10 years. And so really it's just making sure that we have an effective tool to implement the plan that you guys are all working with. And the code and the plan we actually have now too. So this is just a kind of a snapshot of the various codes that we're evaluating just to demonstrate that it's a lot of different pieces. And then also looking at our process analysis. So I won't go into it, but for development review, when someone has an application, we have a thing called interdepartment staff review. And that's essentially all the people that have code that touch a project get together and talk it through their comments. So to give back to the applicant. So we're working on that process. How can it be more effective? How can it be streamlined? Looking at the different types of reviews we have, ensuring that there are not redundancies in those, and then any other processes that are in play. So I don't have in here the project schedule, but kind of roughly our first deliverable, which is that land availability suitability study, with the kind of the initial, what we call the code diagnosis. We should be taking that to that group of different advisory boards and to council as just a draft in March. That's what we're aimed to have. And then the next, we have 2 more deliverables. It'll be a refinement of the code diagnosis, and that will also go through that same kind of grouping of people to get feedback along the way, and then the final recommendations. With that, we're going to be working to prioritize the recommended code changes. I just want to be clear that this project isn't circumventing the process for changing code. It's providing the framework for prioritizing what code changes need to happen. but the code changes still follow the process that any other code would, which is a lot of public outreach. It's very specific to the matter at hand. And then the vetting of going to planning and zoning and the city council. And then we'll be conducting, community outreach on proposed code changes. And then we'll also be looking at our processes internally and modifying those as recommended. And so we kind of, the team that's on the last cap actually meets monthly with the regional plan team. And we've really been trying to figure out, we know that the two are connected, but it's kind of taken us to get the different information to find out really what works well. So we meet on a regular monthly basis, and then our consultant team helped us put this graphic together that kind of shows the two processes and how they're going to be informing each other. So, you guys have been working really hard on the alternative scenarios and those preferred scenarios. That's actually going to start informing those opportunity sites, and that opportunity sites are informing that. And then as you guys are drafting the code and policies, our diagnosis code is going to be informing that, because we're actually going to be able to see, this is how we tried to implement that in code, and this didn't work, or this could be changed different ways. So that consultant team will be providing us feedback that we can then provide feedback for the goals and policies, so that they're written in a way that we can implement them the way that they were intended to be implemented. And then those will also, the draft stuff that you guys are working on will inform our code changes as we're working through the process. And then the same at the very end, the public review draft will be kind of informing those final code recommendations, so it'll be an iterative process. I suspect this won't be the last time that you see me or someone else on this team, because as you're working through the chapters and we have more information, we want to be kind of information sharing and making sure that they remain complementary. And that's it. Thanks.
And I just want to add to Michelle's point here that we're kind of put this graphic together mostly for our internal reminders, because the last cap is going to be relying on a lot of the public engagement we're doing for the regional plan up until a certain point. They are already taking what we are learning through scenario planning, what we're learning through our conversations, envisioning conversations, and applying that to the diagnostic and what kind of concepts they think we need to be looking at to achieve these larger community goals. So that feedback loop has been happening behind the scenes, but the last cap is a much less public facing process. It's very, like, the word diagnostic is really important. It's really taking apart all these codes from all these different periods of time that were all set with different goals in mind, and trying to understand that, so that when this group gets to July 10th and we're looking at implementation and strategies, we really know what hasn't been working and what will need to change. And so that's all these other pieces along the way really help us. But the last cap is really analysis and not as much engagement. Once we kind of arrive at where we have strategies, we have things we've agreed, move us forward to our goals, then they will take those out for public engagement. So their public engagement will probably be in the fall.
Yeah.
And sometime around when the draft plan is out for our 60-day public review. So it's important this committee understands that, because we are going to have to message that very carefully to the public as well.
And
why are we
working
seeing
with
last
you.
cap, and
Yeah.
why are we seeing the regional plan, and how do they work together?
And we'll put the messaging on you all, and we're refining that and get our schedules more, especially as we start to tighten them up during that period. We will be helping with that messaging and letting you know how it's going to engage. The other thing I want to just underscore, and thank you for that clarification, that's perfect, is so Cascadia was the lead on that scenario planning. We got really lucky. So the team that won the last cap project was called Dow. They're an engineering firm, but they subbed with Cascadia. So Cascadia, another part of Cascadia, is actually on our last cap team, and they're specifically doing that code analysis part. And so it's really nice that, we're working behind the scenes and kind of we're keeping connected internally at our office, but then at their end, they're also having that constant coordination. So I think we were very fortunate that that was the team that won.
Paul, did you have a question?
Yeah, I guess there was a lot of information,
I know, I'm sorry.
which is, well, thank you for that. You know, I'm thinking, God, you're our right-hand glove, you know, like,
Yeah,
we're on the same path here, and it's wonderful. But I'm just trying to digest this, and how are we gonna really work together to get the maximum benefit of both? So maybe some of it too is when we, get on the city regional plan update website, which has folders, is there some way that it could be arranged such that I could see every meeting? So I'm on there right now, I'm looking, where's the last meeting? It's probably here somewhere, but I don't see it. So if we could have a roadmap so I can do homework and,
Yeah.
and try and review this and come up with questions that I should have asked, but I was just so overwhelmed.
no, and I gave you guys, for the sake of time, because I know you have a lot of business tonight, I gave you the 10-minute version of what is typically like a 40-minute. So I apologize for jamming all of that and probably speaking super quickly. But yes, we do have a link, but I will also make sure that, I know that we were going to make sure that we had every meeting kind of a link to when we were at planning and zoning and keeping those on there, as well as the schedule, and as we get deliverables, making those available. So if I think I heard you correctly, you're looking for that information, but easily found when you go to the regional plan. Yeah, we
So-
can get those links together.
And when I go there, I find everything.
We could also send out to the committee the longer 40-minute presentation that you did in December for the city council, which will be like a second chance to look at this, but we at least wanted it to be in front of you, so you kind of know what's working together. You're not gonna be as a committee directing the last cap, but you'll be getting that information as we're working on these chapters.
I would like a link to that for sure. And also, I might have just missed it in the copious amount of emails that we got. So was this part of our email chain?
No, we can send this out.
That would be helpful.
I had to pare it down.
Okay. We're glad that you're here. Tom?
You mentioned the 50 opportunity sites.
Yeah,
How many of those are economic opportunity sites that is focused on business?
so great question. They're actually all primarily focused on residential. However, several of them are in the downtown area. And then we've also been working with like economic vitality to understand. We understand that a lot of people who are like businesses that want to bring in a large employment source typically want to be located near where there's a potential for housing. And so those were considerations. Your question makes me realize we probably need to be very clear as we talk about that, where there are those direct links to the residential opportunities with the economic opportunity.
So the code analysis and so forth is not directed at making any of these sites more attractive to business.
No, it's really focused through the housing and the climate carbon neutrality. I think it's the climate emergency. I just want to call it carbon neutrality. Economic Vitality is working on their economic development plan. They've been a major kind of resource for us in what we're doing. And we're just like we're coordinating with the regional plan, we're also coordinating with that plan to make sure that we don't lose sight that we also need to be economically viable for people who want to bring business in here, people who want to retain their business, grow their business. So that's all part of the conversation. But just this conversation reminds me that we need to make sure that we're communicating that through the various outputs that we deliver.
Is Economic Vitality another group like yours?
It is, yeah, they're their own division.
Yeah, Tom, and maybe to add some context, I don't know if this helps at all, but I guess this isn't necessarily the right group or the right place to have that conversation, even though there could be. But I also have a passion for art, being part of the Beautification Public Art Commission. So one of my big things is like, why can't we have at least a statement on the regional plan that says something with art that connects it to art? It's just not the venue for it, but that's something that as committee members, we could vie for, even if it's just a statement that says, you won't find that here, but you will find it here or something, just some form of guidance for our future folks who might have the similar questions that I have for Art and that you have for the company.
And when we talk about document structure and framework in the next agenda item, I've got some things that we can circle back to this conversation more.
Cool. And
Elsa.
Elsa,
I just wanted to mention that there's a comment in the chat from Julie.
bring it.
Would you like me to read it or should she unmute?
I don't know if she's under the weather and just wants it read, maybe.
Okay.
Because of cold and flu season, several of our committee members are silent members tonight.
Do you want to read it?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and read it. She says, I look forward to seeing the opportunity sites and how that aligns or doesn't with the scenarios.
And I had a quick question about the LAS and the LAS and CAP, just because I'm so unfamiliar with it personally. But is this like the county's version of like the land development code would be as opposed to the regional plan and how to get them closer together so they're in alignment? To an extent, or what am I?
The land development code.
Oh, so the land development code, sorry, that is, we're just looking at the city codes, because that's all we apply within the city district boundaries.
Okay.
And so land development codes is, if you go into like the city charter and codes, there's all these different chapters. There's one for engineering, one for fire standards. Water services has their own chapter, planning has their own, creating a subdivision. So literally, it's all those are all considered development codes, because they guide development, and that's what we're doing.
Awesome.
And including plans and policies. If anybody has tried to do a project with the city, they've probably been met with, well, this is our policy, and it's not always in the code, and so that can be a challenge too. So we're also exploring all of those and making sure that those are in line with the actual code that we're applying to development.
Thank you, that helps me a little bit. Michelle, I saw your pen going. Did you have some questions right now or? Good. Al?
How do you determine land availability?
So it was,
It's all owned.
no, that's a fair question.
Yeah.
And we are looking at both public and private sites. So it's really looking at what land is either undeveloped or underdeveloped. And we did look at a certain acreage within a certain boundary within the city. And really, once we identify what those 50 sites are, I mean, that will be, communications to the different property owners. I think in the spirit of what we're trying to do, where we're trying to remove the barriers and helping them actually, I like to say, we're trying to make the right decisions easier. We have a history of, I think, underdeveloped land. We're not using our land wisely. We could get a lot better projects if we actually made the process easier. And so in the spirit of that, I would like to think that people who own these properties would be willing to talk to us about the challenges they even see. They might have tried to market the project or try to develop the project. And it's going to be really important for us to understand if it is available and they have been trying to do something with it, what are their firsthand barriers? But and that's a fair point. I appreciate that.
Well, it's interesting in the context that a while back, one of our mayors had mentioned in a public forum that the regional plan was being developed, and he said, if you own land in this community, you better pay attention to what the regional plan is doing, because they're making plans for your land that you may or may not agree with. And that's a fair point. And so I'm wondering if you make a determination that this piece of land, particular piece of land is available, do you get that from the owner? Do you get that? How do you synchronize that with the future development and the land ownership?
Yeah.
I mean,
I think
should
ownership
be
is
part of the
always
plan.
a wild card. What we can look at is do the economic conditions around the property, the economic opportunities of the property lead us to believe that it could be priced at a point where it would be redeveloped. Now, whether the owner is willing to sell or that fits their plans is a different question entirely, but ownership changes. And that happens regularly, that someone who held a property for a long time for their own personal portfolio reasons decides it's time to liquidate it and get it in the market. And, we've had several property owners in Flagstaff that held quite a bit of property for several decades, and then they eventually start selling pieces of it off. The Knackers, the Thompsons, those property owners have strategic reasons they put property on the market, but that doesn't change what is possible on it from a utilities and a zoning standpoint, and also just from a bigger regional opportunity perspective.
And we're not proposing to change anybody's zoning order. It's the analysis is being done under the current zoning. What could you get? What could you achieve on this property? So for instance, we have a sustainability and a housing incentives.
Yeah.
They're hardly ever taken because the incentives are to get more density. Most of the development projects that we see aren't even achieving the maximum. I mean, we were happy if they can get the minimums. So they're not even looking at taking any kind of, providing affordable housing or providing a golden standard, because they can't even get the density. They don't have any reason to take the incentive. And so we're trying to understand, what is that barrier to getting that density? Why can't you even achieve with the bare minimum of what code allows you to? And that's what we're trying to fix, and not necessarily recommending they rezone or anything like that.
The code analysis, I totally agree with. I think that's way overdue. And that's a very good, I think that's an effort that I could easily get behind. The land availability, I think it's the number one mystery in the process of regional planning.
And certainly information we did not have the last time we updated the regional plan. We did not have this level of investigation into these questions.
I think it's going to be really helpful. I know you guys have a lot of business to get through, but understanding what the land that is left, that's more probably likely to be redeveloped or developed, understanding what those physical challenges are, I think informs this group tenfold. And so I think it will be very beneficial.
Last call for questions about the last cap. How about online also?
Nope.
Okay, that sounds good.
Oh, actually, Julie has a question,
Okay.
and Kim also has a
Oh,
question. Go ahead.
sorry, it wasn't a question. It was just the last thing that Michelle said, which is so important, and it's understanding the availability of what's left for how we have the conversation as the regional plan group in the preferred scenarios and what it looks like.
Thank you, Julie.
Okay, there's also a question from Kim, so if she'd like to unmute, otherwise I'll read it out loud.
Kim, if you want to unmute or.
Okay, so Kim's question is, when speaking of density, is that in terms of people or units?
Units.
Okay, and the answer is units.
Yeah, thank you. There is something goofy going on with my phone, so I couldn't unmute. But yes, that is, I wasn't sure if density pertained to families in the dwellings or the number of units occupied and unoccupied when contractors come in and build.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. Anything else from staff? Good, then we'll be moving on. We're on number 5. That's document organization and structure. Staff.
Yep, I have a few slides to share on this. Thank you, Vice Chairs. Yeah, so the regional plan, as we talked about, has all these relationships with implementation, which the code, the last cap is trying to get at, and specific plans, like our neighborhood plans are supposed to get at. I want to talk a little bit about the elements and parts of what we're gonna be reviewing chapter by chapter and what they mean. And I think that's just good background. We all have the same understanding and we can talk about the semantics from there. And so to get into that conversation, I want to remind everyone what the strengths, weaknesses, and opportunity and threats analysis said. This is the analysis we did with the 26 boards and commissions that we went and visited this summer before we started public engagement. They really said that the regional plan being comprehensive is still very valued and important, but having too many priorities means we have none. And that the plan needed fewer goals and more strategy identification. So what we're going to talk about is really getting at how we're going to restructure what we're doing to get to this. And the last cap, of course, sums that as well. We need to be very clear about expectations when it comes to trade-offs. There are many win-win scenarios in our future, but not all of our choices will be win-win. And we can't afford to be blindly optimistic is kind of how I put it. We need to be reality grounded optimistic. And that's the kind of thing that the commissions really pushed back and gave us feedback on. There are opportunities in the region that need more examination. And so the plan should identify what those are, even if we don't have enough time to dig all the way into a decision point or a strategic decision about them. And that the plan is not doing enough to address affordability and cultural diversity. There was a little bit of a mix on how people felt about climate change because we had just had a major plan amendment about climate change, but had not had any updates on these other ones. So I think climate change would have ranked up in there if it weren't for the time. So in your packets, I'm not going to read all 20-something pages. I gave you a table that has every single requirement from the Arizona revised statutes for the city and the county for a document like this. And we put it in the table so you can see them side by side with some suggestions of how we might include them in the plan. And then we also gave you all the text, so you can actually see like the context for that list. So that's an important reference that we want you to have as we're going through the chapters. An important thing to know is that the plan has to include certain topics. There are also things in the code, in the state statute, that we cannot do. An example that we've been talking about this week is we cannot identify state or private land as open space or parks without written property owner permission. So I can't go to a state land parcel and say this should be open space. We're actually prohibited from doing that in the plan. Now, there might be something we could say this region has a high value for open space, and we'd like to be acquiring open space here, but we can't call out individual properties. So there's some do's and there's some don'ts. And then there's a gray area where we risk going astray of what the SWOT analysis told us, which the gray area is things we're not required, but we're not prohibited from doing in the regional plan. And those are really important to think about because that's where we ended up with what Mr. Melissa and I have called the plan bloat, which is we had so many policies about things that weren't really tied to land use, transportation, and natural resources in the plan that it washed away over the vehicles, right? It kept it kind of watered down. So we want to make sure this is a more juicy, concentrated plan. And that means thinking about that gray area very carefully and prioritizing what's in it. But for the purposes of this, it's really important that you all have access to and understand the must-do list and the don't-do list. For instance, somebody in the chapter I just sent out for review said, why do you have a policy about air quality if everything's cool with air quality? And I was like, because we have to have one about air quality, because they said so. That's the answer. And so that kind of will happen along the way. In an effort to meet the concentration goal that we heard from the SWOT analysis from those who use the plan, I'm trying to take the things that the state statute calls an element. So an element is that thing that's required. It'll say things like there's an environmental planning element, and it has to include these things. And the natural resources element and it has to include these things. We don't have to have a chapter for every one of those. We can combine them into sensible organization. So it's important to recognize the organization of the document. If we have tons and tons of chapters, we're much more likely to have more goals and policies. If we combine and organize them so they're more comprehensive, we can have fewer goals and policies and still cover a lot of ground. So that's kind of the strategy for what was needed again. At the same time, there are things that are required that touch a lot of chapters. So a good example is climate change, equity, community character. When I go through the public comments on many of the chapters, these things come up over and over and over again. In the last plan, we had 1 or 2 things about equity, a little standalone section on climate change within a chapter, and a whole chapter about community character. And they still come up kind of evenly in the public comments we receive. So what we're proposing is that we don't treat those as an element or a chapter, but we treat them as a theme. And themes are things we might talk about in multiple chapters. So equity is going to come up in transportation, and equity might come up in natural resources, and it will come up in neighborhood revitalization. But there's not going to be an equity chapter. Does that make sense? So I want us to have some words to ask this question of, is it an element? Is it a theme? Is it really part of the whole chapter? And make sure we use these words with some purpose. I know they seem like plain English, but I want us to have an understanding of them for this context. Is that kind of helpful?
Michelle?
Good.
Can you send us that?
Yes.
I would find that really helpful because
I will send out the slides. Yeah. But you did get like a packet with like kind of my rough definitions. And these are working definitions, so go ahead.
You mentioned the things that are required. Maybe I'm getting ahead of myself with this handout that you sent us, legal requirements for the Flagstaff regional plan.
Mhm.
Page 14 says, paragraph 1A, it says, designates the proposal, general distribution, location, and extent of such uses of the land for housing, business, industry. You don't see business industry up there. Required to have business and industry.
Yes, but that is something under the land use elements.
Right, but it's not an element or a thing.
It could be a theme if we wanted to talk about business and industry as a
Doesn't
theme.
have to be. Says this is our.
Well, it's a requirement of the land use elements. Does that make sense? Like these sub bullets, these are considered sub bullets to one. So we're looking at page 14, which is Arizona Revised Statute 9-461.05 for those who are online or maybe not looking at the handout, which is section C1. And under C1, there's an A, B, C, D, a redacted F, and a G. So we have to, in the land use element, which is this one, talk about all of these things. And that doesn't necessarily mean we can't reorganize some of those sub bullets, but like my checklist as the project manager is this plan cannot pass a legal review with the city and county attorneys until it has all these things. But they are part of the land use element using the terminology that the state uses, right?
Can I ask, how were these ones that you have up here chosen?
Meaning
The ones that you have for element and the ones that you have for theme.
So elements are always tied to these words in the statute that say a land use element, a conservation element, a open space element. So there should always be a cross-reference between the word element and the text of the state statute.
I understand the general content. I'm talking about those particular ones. The decision that growth, land use, parks, open spaces, and cost of development would be the elements and the community character, equity, climate change, affordable housing, which these are themes. Who decided to put those in?
So me and my team did.
So those are things that we can adjust and we're gonna.
Correct.
Yeah, okay,
You
that's
can
all.
you can adjust where elements, so here's a good distinction. You can make requests on adjusting where elements are discussed in the plan. You cannot remove any elements. All parts of all elements must be discussed somewhere, irregardless of anyone's personal opinion about the wording or the topic. It just has to be done. We have to find a way to do it.
Business and industry, we can have discussions about where those should go.
Yeah, when the time
Right.
comes up, then we can, and if everybody seems to agree nonchalantly, then it'll happen immediately. If not, then it'll be added to our parking lot. Sure.
Yeah,
We'll have
exactly.
deeper dives on it.
And so that's why when I send out chapters, like I'm gonna try, you're not gonna get to see everything at once. So like resource stewardship and resilience, people might look at that one and go, well, why don't we talk about flood control here? And we're gonna talk about flood control in the public safety chapter is the recommendation staff has. And if when we get to public safety, you go, actually, I do think we should talk about that in resource stewardship and resilience, we can talk about that. I did like a little graph, and when we get there, you'll see these are very interconnected. And so there is some judgment on where stuff goes that can be part of our conversation. But this is kind of, if we call it a theme, it means it is not required by the state, but it's obvious from the public comments that people want us to talk about it. Does that make sense? If we call it an element, it is definitely in there.
So theoretically, then we could decide that the element of land use belongs in the chapter with resource stewardship too.
Sure. If we come to some consensus on that, that could be true. So, but I just put these up as examples, so you can kind of see there's gonna be overlap. All of this is about land in the end, so our lumping and splitting will have an effect on how much bloat there is in the plan, how big it gets and what the gray areas look like. But we've got to have some structural start to get from here to there. So I put in your packet some definitions, and goals and policies are probably something you're familiar with because the plan you get today is full of goals and policies, but that's all it's full of. And if you'll remember, the SWOT analysis told us that we needed to get the focus off of goals and policies and get those out there, make them clear, and then really talk about the strategies. So to that effort, we are introducing 2 new parts to this draft plan, which are very open to discussion and refinement as we go. And the first is having implementation guidelines. So I sometimes think of an implementation guideline as the second sentence of a policy. So the policy might read, we want accessible parks for all communities. And the implementation guideline might be in the city. That means every resident has a park within 10-minute drive of their house. In the county, that might mean every community has a park space and access to a regional park within an hour. It's just a completely different guideline for what that same policy can mean in a different context. So that's what we mean by implementation guidelines. And what they will do for us is they're going to show our assumptions because policies have to be a little, they have to have some dearth. We have to be very like Hemingway-esque with our words, very careful. We don't want them to be overly wordy or hard to understand. But there's always a lot of unspoken things in the way you write a policy. So implementation guidelines are our chance to spit it out and get it clear without making it policy itself. And then they also are things where the underlying conditions change. As Michelle said, you know, we wrote engineering standards in 1990 with a certain set of assumptions. But if those assumptions change, we might consider looking at our policy a little different. And we could, if with implementation guidelines, we could do that without necessarily having to amend the plan or having to amend the policy. We could say, yes, this is the implementation guideline, we understand the assumptions, but if the facts and the current conditions are different, that can be part of our public discourse, right? We always end up in front of council or at a public meeting having these conversations. And a lot of times we wonder, why did they write it that way? So implementation guidelines are answer the why and how. Strategies, which is a whole chapter we wrote last time in the regional plan, and it was so big, and I call it a little monstrous, like hundreds of strategies. that the city council just took it and went, nope. And they removed it from the plan. The county did end up adopting strategies, but the city adopted 0. And said, we'll figure it out. So we would like to be very strategic about what strategies get proposed, so that doesn't happen. It should be key projects, clear priorities and opportunities for achieving goals and policies. And it shouldn't be so comprehensive that it's everything. I think Michelle and I have talked about, and Justin, Melissa and I have talked about that. Strategies maybe are a thing we could amend every couple of years. We could set a cycle where every other year we do an evaluation of our strategies and decide if we want to do an amendment. Take some out, put some in, be more nimble with this part of the plan. We amended the city's regional plan 26 times in 10 years. It is not like this sits on a shelf and no one touches it again. So we can think about these things a little more nimbly. So this is kind of how we're proposing to reduce the number of goals and policies and actually have a more meaty discussion of what we need. The other thing the current plan didn't do that we're proposing it to now is be clear on which maps in the plan are informational and which are a policy map. So a policy map for me is like the future growth illustration. It tells you where activity centers are, it tells you where suburban areas are and urban areas, and it's very aspirational. The road network illustration is another one. It says, when we get out to these greenfield areas, we want a road roughly here and one that connects us in this spot. And those are pretty policy-driven maps. Some other ones, like significant natural resources, they show you the status of and which resources are significant. But, for instance, prairie dogs have been on that map for the last few years. And if anybody, I can have the biologists and ecologists give some lectures on this, but I worked out in national grasslands in Oklahoma and Texas for a couple of years. Prairie dog colonies grow really big, and then they have plague collapses where they all get really sick and they die when their colony gets really small. So on a landscape, their boundaries change every couple of years, and they have these colony collapses that are part of their cycle in the ecosystem. So it's not like a natural resource map is a static thing. And so it is sometimes confusing, and I think Chair Hayward, who I wish was here for this conversation, but will be at the next one, I'm sure, has come into my office and said, I don't know how to use this map. What am I supposed to do with it? Because there's no prairie dogs there anymore. Or this condition is changed because it burned. So we really need to think about some of these maps as more baseline information and then tell people how to use the information it provides. Same with watershed, existing parks and open space, where we have flood control improvements. Those are all great. We want to show them on a map. We want people to know where those assets in the community are. But we also want to recognize that if the data changes, that's probably more important than if we amend the plan to get the data on a map. Right? Does that kind of make sense? And so this is one of those things, as we go through, I will mark, this is an informational map, this is a policy map. And some of them might feel like a blend of the two, and that's something we can pick apart as we start looking through the material. So this is where I got to make a mind map. I talk a lot about how growth and land use, transportation, and water, or really all natural resources, are kind of the core bubbles in this plan. Everything is going to tie to them. And so I kind of created this to show they also are going to interact with each other quite a lot too. So we are going to review a chapter called Stewardship and Resilience. And it's going to have a little bit about open space, and a little about water resources, and a little about all these topics. And we're also going to have to make sure they're connected. And so when you review that chapter and you endorse that it's heading in the right direction, we may still have to revise it because we may come up with something over here that makes us revisit something over here, right? So this web has to we have to keep kind of monitoring it as we go. And staff, of course, will be working to help sure we're tracking all those things. But this is kind of when you ask, like, who decided that was the chapter? We're thinking about it like this. This is how staff started looking at things and picking it apart and saying, how could we be more effective? How can we tell this story about our future better? How can we make it clear? How can we address the things that the SWOT analysis and all these users of the plan told us we needed to touch on as we did this? So that's what I have for this topic. Questions?
We have any questions or discussion from the group? Check online, please, as well.
Nothing in the chat.
Also, nothing in the chat. Excellent. Well, that was a really nice depiction of what we're looking forward to, staff, and I do appreciate that.
Did I answer your questions? Everybody's questions from earlier, I guess.
I just don't see any questions.
So are these bubbles formalized, or is this just kind of your summary?
This is my conceptual summary of it. It's not final till we're done working as a committee.
I saw this as just a way to put ideas into our heads if we didn't already have some established. But for me, it helped to categorize what my thoughts were for the future, really. And Michelle?
This is great that you have this. And as I was reviewing the stewardship chapter, I was like, well, wait a minute, what if we do this? And then over here, we do something else, we're gonna have to come back. So I'm glad that you're talking about it. That's all gonna fit together.
Yeah, but we have to do it in 2-hour chunks.
Yeah.
Unless you guys want to retreat.
And that's why we will be moving on to the next number 7 on our list, which is the major and minor plan amendments. This gives us a chance to review of how things how these categories have worked over time and how they may be shaped as we work on regional plan content. Do we have Smart Sarah for me?
Sure. So I put 2 things in here. I put major and minor plan amendment FAQs for you and the portion of the current plan that talks about what's a major and minor amendment. And so there's a lot of things that are in city code, but the way the state statute is set up is it says we determine what's a major and minor plan amendment in our own plan. And there are lots of frameworks other cities use to do this. And you have to really base it on how we build the plan. So we can't really make all these decisions until we have a future growth illustration. We've kind of gotten far enough down the road that we go, okay, these are the things that are a big deal to change. And these are the things where it's kind of more routine to see changes proposed in this part of the plan or in this manner. And this was a really important conversation last time, and we actually did it twice because the first time we tried to do it was unimplementable. And I had to go back to city council and give them a whole new chapter 3 to try and create a set of major and minor plan amendments that we could actually apply. Because what was happening in the first 2 years between 2014 and 2016, we did this amendment, is someone would come in for a pre-application meeting with the city and they would make a proposal. And it didn't seem like a big deal. It seemed like a pretty minor change overall, but it was just over the line and required major plan amendment, which creates a huge hurdle for the project to overcome. And so when we looked at that, we were saying yes to things that were a big deal really easily and no to things that were not a big deal, really like creating a lot of hurdles for that. So much like the code analysis, we went back and looked at it. And the reason it was like that is because we had picked like an arbitrary number, like anything over 10 acres that's this kind of change is major and smaller ones are minor. But we had created a map that was fuzzy. And so I could never accurately calculate acres of anything on our future growth illustration because we didn't draw property line based boundaries. And then I was supposed to calculate, is this 9.8 or 10.1 based on a line that didn't match any other lines that exist in the real world. So what we did in the maps and what we did in the categories we created was completely misaligned. And that's why we had to go back and create different categories. So that's why I want everyone to think about this and pay attention to it from start to finish. So major plan amendments are defined as substantial alterations. My vernacular is it's a big deal. It's a big deal to change things this way. About the city's land use mixture, balance of land uses, and their impact on large areas and other policies would substantially alter the plan, essentially. So substantial, big deal, that's the language. Yes.
Can you, give an example of a major amendment that had passed?
Yeah, so, prior to this plan being adopted, Little America's development plan was a major plan amendment. They did a big major plan amendment in 2013. And it was a very big change to their land use categories. So other things that have been a major plan amendment have been changing any of the goals and policies. That's one of the things that council decided could be done without a major plan amendment. But often what happens when I sit in a pre-application meeting and I go, huh, well, your proposal will require a major plan amendment, people go and change their plans. They sort of go away. I jokingly said that I'm a little bit of a bad news when people see me sit down in person in a pre-application meeting, they're like, oh no, this is not gonna be the answer I want. And that's okay, I'm not doing that on purpose, that's just because I go to the ones in person when major plan amendment is something we're gonna talk about. But it costs time, it costs money, and so they generally change their ideas. So often things that when we sit down and say that would be a major plan amendment, they never make it to a hearing. We've seen very few of them, but we had a few years ago. So our categories that we created in 2016, these are our updated categories, pertain to the urban growth boundary, the area types in the regional plan, the place types, which were centers and corridors and neighborhoods, and amendments to the goals and policies. And you have this in your packet, so don't read it. But one of the things that we also did is we made it, and I'll explain why, so don't ask it, but I'll get there. We made it so that some of these categories had exemptions when a property owner was also, or the city was also doing a specific plan. And I'll tell you why in a minute. So major plan amendments have some very clear requirements. The city requires that there's a pre-application meeting with the comprehensive planning manager. So whoever's sitting in my chair, you can't just have it with some other planner. You have to sit and talk to the person who monitors and handles major plans. It has to precede any other development application. So when you have a major plan amendment, you can't apply for a site plan or rezoning or any other permits. You're paused until the amendment is done. It has the required 60-day public review, just like the plan update does. And it has to be, this is a change. When in 2014, it had to be adopted within a single calendar year, the state legislature has changed that requirement and we've updated our code for the new requirement. It now has to be processed within one calendar year of a complete application. And I think that's the best thing since sliced bread, because I used to have annual, like frantic calls in March of people who needed major plan amendments who thought they could get one pulled together in 2 weeks. This change lets us get people who need a major plan amendment to the point where they have enough information, and then we start the clock. And that really helps us understand and also give these things a timeline that makes sense. What happens if your application takes more than a year? Once it's complete, you got to start over. It's a do not pass go, do not collect $100. You have to restart your application. So this time pressure is really important and one of the limitations that doesn't exist for any other kind of application. It also requires, instead of 1, but 2 public hearings with our planning and zoning commission and a 2/3 majority vote of city council. So you can't have a straight majority on a major plan amendment. Minor amendments are heard concurrent with zoning cases and annexation cases. They don't have a unique timeline and they're a straight majority vote. There's also more analysis required for a major plan amendment, including a school impact analysis and police and fire protection. And the reason, and I'll get to this, the reason we don't require that specific plans also have major plan amendments is because for the city of Flagstaff, our code requires that if you're doing a specific plan, you have to follow all the procedures, including all this analysis. And the only difference is you don't have that 1 year time frame. So you can have more time, but you have to do all the same work. So that is the reason why specific plans and major plan amendments are just slightly different versions of the same process and have slightly different products, but they go through all the same reviews, all the same public engagement, all the same hearings. Both require a 2/3 majority vote. So this is my quick rundown on these. Because as we're making decisions, we're also gonna have to decide, well, how do I decide if in 5 years someone wants to change this? If it's major or minor? We will have to have a list of those by the time we get to July 10th. Or at least a good framework of how we want to approach it. Staff will propose something based on our conversations and we'll talk about it in the office.
Joe?
I have just a question about clarification. You sent us 6 pages from chapter 3 of the existing plan. Is that the amendment?
No, yes, all the text you see, like the keeping the plan current section, which is all in chapter 3. So chapter 3, pages 9 through what is it, 18, yeah, 15. Those are the parts we updated in 2016. If you want to see the previous version, I'd be happy to send it out. I never figured out how to do it in real life.
I just want to make sure I understand this was. Is there an opportunity to comment and talk about these categories? These, how you determine what goes into major and minor, right?
Right. So
Colored chart.
So once we kind of have a land use framework and a future road illustration and a road network illustration, we're going to want to nail that down as we're building those. What's a big deal change? What's a lesser change? How we draw these lines. This is how we drew what you've got in your packet is how we drew the lines when we took a second bite of the apple in 2016. We can look at it again. And it's got to really be based on how we do things. Like they have to work together. Like I said, you can't have a fuzzy map and a precise cutoff. Things have to go in, work hand in hand in these kinds of categories.
Yeah, one of the things I was thinking about when I was reading this, it's lessons learned from the minor plan amendment for the NH, moving the Tiffin Center, and how when I look at what's in their major plan, and I think of that and what could be added to this graph. So let's, for instance, thinking an activity center and shape up and sort of like up, right? Taking it from a neighborhood to a regional activity center. Right now, that would be a minor. But when I think about what that all that was, I think that should be major. Because it's, to me, that's a big impact in terms of the impact on the ground, given the existing. So then we'll look when we get our plan further along. See what that's about.
Right, and I think that's a good example of also where the last cap will give us some input to that too, because part of the logic for that in 2014, 2015, and 2016 was most projects were underperforming in their density and intensity. And we were really trying to get these activity centers to build up and more density. And so we didn't want to see single family homes where we really wanted apartments, right? So we were trying to incentivize people going bigger, thinking bigger in activity centers and being a little less limited, which is important for open space management and all kinds of things, right? So there will be trade-offs, right? We talked about how have to be about trade-offs. This is an area where clarity and trade-offs will be important to keep front of mind as we start to build this part of the plan. Did we have somebody jump in or out, or was there a question?
Yeah, someone was just jumping in and out.
Hi, Sarah, this is Kim. I have a quick question.
Kim, go ahead.
Hey, for the, I was able to hear part of the discussion on the slide, but for the major amendment part, the traffic analysis, was there a radius of the impact that was specified?
So here's a fun fact. Flagstaff is the only city in Arizona that requires a traffic impact analysis for major plan amendments. I don't know why we do it and no one else does. It's not one of the state required impact analyses. So we use what's in our engineering code, and they have a method of scoping the traffic impact analysis that's the same for a major plan amendment and a minor plan amendment. We've talked with engineering over the years about saying maybe they should have different ways of scoping these two kinds of decisions because they're a little different. Like this is a policy decision and it's not a site plan where we have exact land uses and exact counts for traffic. But we've never gotten to the point of cleaning that up. So it's really, we treat it the same. Other cities do not require any traffic impact analysis until you have a site plan or a zoning case. We are unique in this and it's always weird. I don't know how else to say it. It's one of those odd fits, right? We're trying to take a high precision tool and apply it to a low precision decision. So another place where we have this, things like the code analysis project are really important because we've made we've had these mismatches occur over time because we've been changing one part and not updating the other, if that makes sense. Does that answer your question, Kim?
It sure does, and that sounds very Flagstaff, so thank you very much.
WTF, welcome to Flagstaff.
Yeah, I don't think that's the reputation we want. We can be honest about ourselves around here.
John Ruggles, did you have any input on this topic here, or do you have any experience with the current plan?
Actually, not anything specific other than we've been doing this, comparing this to major versus minor amendment requirements in the county's comprehensive plan. That being said, however, the role of the different jurisdictions that this, when the regional plan is adopted as an amendment to the comprehensive plan, that will not be a problem. We had a reading from the county attorney's office back in 2013 when this came before Planning and Zoning Commission at the county and then Board of Supervisors that really laid it out very specifically. So differences, yes, they're going to exist. And there are some, but I think pretty minor with major and minor amendments because the intention of both is very much the same.
Well, it's good to know that when this comes up again, you'll have that in the back pocket to throw at us, keep us fresh. That's something I didn't consider myself. Abel or anybody else from the south side of the room? Discussion or anything? John, have you had to deal with any major or minor plan amendments in some of the projects you've been part of yet, or you try to make them all fit inside the box?
In the box that was built many years ago.
Right. But Lillian, did you have anything here? Anybody else online have any questions or comments?
Not seeing anything in the chat.
Well, thank you, Elsa, and staff. This is a good point to move forward. We are kind of pushing for time here.
Yep.
All right, we'll go to the discussion. We'll be moving on to 7, which is the initial analysis and findings of scenario choosing. And I'm assuming that you have a little more information for us.
Yep, I've got, this is a presentation that was pulled together very quickly by our consulting team at Cascadia Partners. We closed the regional plan scenario choosing a week ago. And so we have not done all the crosstabs and heavy statistical analysis that we will end up doing. But we wanted to give you like this taster of what we see initially from what we learned. So for those who took it, the online open house and the in-person open house had some welcome videos that helped us kind of orient people to scenario choosing. People had the option of taking the priorities quiz, which we called kind of a personality quiz. It was supposed to take your values and match you to the best fit scenario. Give you feedback through the information we learned when we modeled the scenarios, and then also let you kind of give a final answer through scenario choosing and ranking survey. So we had about 557 people who took the priorities quiz. Some people found this one a little confusing. They kind of did, one of the things I discovered people didn't have in their head is that every time you took the survey, if you logged in, it randomized A, B, C, D, E, so that it didn't bias you into picking the first one. And some people were like, I picked C every time and I didn't get C as an answer. So I would have done that differently if we thought about it, but a few people found that confusing, a handful. And then of those, we didn't require that you also take the scenario choosing, it didn't force it on you. But still, about 94% of the respondents who took the priority quiz also gave us a final answer in the scenario choosing and ranking. You can see that the results skewed more heavily towards people who lived in the city. But please know that Melissa, in working on the comprehensive plan, is also at the same time running focus groups all over the county. And we kind of have some complementary information from that that can be part of what we're going to cross tabulate with these findings. So we are concerned about the low result rate for county residents.
Answer one question.
Go ahead.
Is that the only demographic information? We don't know people who are from certain neighborhoods.
We do. We just haven't gotten that all analyzed yet. This is week 1 analysis, so not week 4. So when we look at these, and this is not breaking it down by city versus county or east side versus west side, we will get those together, just not right yet. We can see that housing affordability, making a more walkable and bikeable Flagstaff, and growth that reduces our climate change impacts, top of the list. Who feels surprised? Nobody. This is what we expected to see, so good. But there were plenty of options that people had about expanding parks and access, leaning towards the single family character, more frequent and convenient public transit. We can see those weren't unpopular ideas. They just didn't kind of rise to the top and have as much consensus. So then we had another one that said of strategies here, which 3 should the city prioritize? And some of these, this one was a trick question because some of them didn't tie to scenarios. They were just things that people talk about a lot. And so the question was really, are the things that are most important to you land use scenario building things, or are they just other kinds of policies we need to be considering? And so 2 of them that came out really are scenario-based things, which are minimize water use and plan for water conservation. Scenarios show us we can make some impacts there. And then preserving natural areas with high ecological values. So you can see there's already a trade-off between these 2 questions because some of the areas with high ecological values might have trade-offs with housing or climate change impacts. In fact, one of the scenarios, a gentleman who's a wildlife biologist who I've known in town for a long time, is a county resident. He said he was looking at our scenarios and he said, I never realized that the strategy you might apply to have the biggest climate impact could also introduce the most climate hazards. Because that was one of the things that the modeling showed us. And he went, boom, I didn't ever think those things would be trade-offs. So that's the kind of thing that carrying these conversations forward is very important to think about. Housing types. We asked people what kind of housing should Flagstaff look. Folks, when they're answering this, most of them had not looked at the scenarios. But they really lean towards missing middle housing, which is townhomes, duplexes, ADUs, triplexes, quads, and more compact single family housing, which is single family housing closer together and on smaller lots. People did lean more away from the larger multifamily housing. That doesn't mean we're not going to have any because we're already zoned for quite a lot of it, and we're probably not going to be able to get rid of that zoning, but not as much an emphasis to get more of it. So what should be the top priorities for expanding transportation options in the region? So safer options for walking and biking in Central East Flagstaff was top of the list. Lots of choices, but that's the one that really came as the most important to expand our transportation options, and pretty significant. So the next part was about our rural and suburban communities, and people got a chance to kind of look at this and say more housing and jobs should be added with new infrastructure supported, or we should not take on much more growth. You can see these 2 aren't that far apart, and these are just people's additional impressions. And so this is just kind of where the people start this conversation. How do you see the central, Flagstaff, Milton, and Route 66? People say, I like the amount of building heights to stay about the same. But a little more strongly than the last one. Talking about East Flagstaff, more housing affordability and more compact housing types in existing neighborhoods was more strongly preferred. Pretty evenly split on whether we should have a high level of investment in current parks or focus on building new parks. This is the kind of feedback we kind of were getting. So, same thing when we talk about workforce and economic strategies. People heavily said they would prefer we invest in affordable housing over investment in attracting large businesses. So when we looked at this, people's initial values discussion most heavily weighted towards business as usual. What you're going to see is that showing people what business as usual actually means for the community changed a lot of minds. So this is where people are starting the conversation. I think we hear that in the public dialogue. People talk about, I like things the way they are. Why do they need to keep changing? Why can't things be how they were when I moved here? Those are really common refrains of Flagstaff conversations about growth, right? But what we also see in the data when you look a little more is people who want neighborhood infill actually have stronger correlations. Like more of their answers were neighborhood infill answers. And the people who had answers with business as usual or complete communities, they kind of were picking at other pieces of other scenarios in addition to the things they like about the way things are today. So that's kind of what this chart shows, an average score. And then an average score over all respondents, even at this prioritization level, actually leans towards neighborhood infill. So when we start to normalize the data, it looks strongly like people want things the way they are. But there is a flavor that people, even people who like things the way they are, recognize some need for differences in how the future could look. Let's see, oops, went too fast. So this is kind of the distribution on scenario choosing. Oh, sorry. So then people had a chance to look at all the scenario cards and they learned about the different scenarios and the answers started to change. So suddenly the first choice became very heavily neighborhood infill and urban corridors and centers. When they looked at outcomes, they liked these two best at much higher rates than the other two. And then it has a good pattern where it's clearly neighborhood infill is first choice, urban centers and corridors are second, communities are third, and business as usual ranked the lowest. So you can see this distribution is pretty strong once people got information about what those choices actually mean in 20 years. And the differences showed up, and partially because there were more responses, but they were stronger correlations in the city than in the county, which also matches a lot of our public dialogue that we heard during the visioning surveys. Is some folks in the county don't find this data as persuasive as people who live in the city do. So what we learned is that overall, there's very strong support in these surveys for housing affordability, reduction of climate impacts, preserving high-value natural areas, using water and energy efficiently, creating more middle and compact single-family housing, and safer and more options for biking and walking in Central and East Flagstaff. That really came through very strongly in the data. And we'll cross-tab it and show you what that looks like in more detail across the region when we have a little more time with the data. But that's our 1 week later takeaways. Thank you, Alex Steinberger and Sachi Arakawa from Cascadia Partners for the quick turnaround.
Yeah, I was pretty impressed by that, by just getting some data that quickly. So kudos to staff. We'll open it up for discussion here. Walter, do you have some input?
Yeah, I just had a question. So, Sarah, are you gonna be doing more of that? Or are you pretty much done?
Sorry, let me turn on the captions. So you said, are we going to do more scenario planning, or are we kind of done with scenario planning? There is more scenario planning to do. This group is going to be key to the next step, which is taking these initial findings and turning them into a preferred scenario. So we're looking for feedback tonight on anything you see here is something you want us to, as we're developing a preferred scenario that staff thinks can accomplish all these things, that you really want us to pay attention to. This is your chance to kind of raise our, pay attention to this trade-off versus this one's really key, and we should be thinking about it. I know we're getting later in the meeting, but definitely that's what we're looking for in terms of that feedback. And then in April, you'll get a draft preferred alternative to look at and help us pick apart. And that's where I think, as Al said, we're kind of drawing on people's properties and saying this part of town has this potential and this part of town has this potential. So once we talk about it here, we may also want to take it out to the public again.
And just for my clarification, when did the scenario planning process start with the community? 2022, 2021?
It started at the beginning of 2023. So really we did, so we pulled together a technical advisory committee in January of 2023. We had public workshops in March and April of 2023, and then the TAC, that group, which some of the folks here were on, worked with us throughout the year and monitored kind of all the data and how we were using it for scenario planning, which brought us to the scenario choosing phase. And then you guys are basically picking up that baton from the TAC, and you're going to carry it through the creation of it.
Yeah. And I guess this is a little less useful information, but it still kind of blows my mind when you look at some of the first slides, that all that community outreach that took place, and we still only got somewhere over, between 600 and 800 people that are going to decide the plan for 100 total houses. And it's not the city, they did everything they could. I see them do some things that are quite creative to reach out to folks.
Just along those lines, not just the number of people that participated, but the methodology that was used to attract people. It strikes me that we're attracting the people who are already very interested in government things going on, they're attuned to that. We didn't, I don't believe, make a real effort to do like the polling organization would do, to randomly select people in the community so that an adequate and appropriate random sample of people. That's why I asked about the demographics, what's the distribution like? Also, what was the sampling technique? A polling organization, very hard. They don't get a lot of people, but they do make sure they get a sample of the entire population, a representative sample, and I don't think.
Well, I'll say this. I came from a sociology background. That's what my training is prior to being a planner. And there is a real difference between survey methodology and public participation. And you get very different kinds of information. Because if we were doing this as a survey and the goal was to have a representative sample, then we'd have done it very differently. But the goal here was to get people's thinking captured and to see what kind of information changed people's thinking. And we weren't trying to do that as a sociological experiment, but as an actual instance of understanding the community's dialogue and what is pushing and pulling that dialogue. So, 500 responses would be a smash bang, response rate for any survey. It's very similar to what we had for the museum fire surveys. We use tools and techniques very similar to those. In fact, like when we did some of those actual peer review surveys, we used some of our public participation methodologies as a comparative to them. We actually found we got much more demographically representative numbers by not using survey methodology in Flagstaff, because survey methodology bias tends to eliminate people who are younger and people who are working professionals and many of those things, and tends to lean in a different direction. So there's some bias to survey methodology. That's very helpful when you're doing like polling ahead of an election. It's not as helpful in this situation where we're trying to understand decision-making and thinking within the community. So we absolutely can do surveys when we are getting close to sending things to a ballot, if we would like to make those requests of the city and county to fund it. But it's not always necessary, and I don't think it, my experience in Flagstaff in the last 2 years, it actually doesn't give better information.
Yeah, I've noticed that as well. And it's kind of the difference between owning a business and running a business and then running a municipality. I think that's something that is competing. When you're running a business and you want to influence people to come to your store or whatever the thing is, but the way that I see that the city did it was a way for people to organically enter the process. Now, I understand where you're coming from, as the people that are already in tune to the process are going to influence a lot of the decision, but the opportunity was for the entire community. And I know that my personal outreach included knocking on doors to bring people out, which was very limited.
And the workshops that we did were demographically in a various amount of people. It stretched all the way across the city. It was pretty fun to watch too. And a lot of people didn't really know anything. So it was an opportunity and Sarah was there. Tulane did one at the library. We did a couple on the Sunnyside, and it went all over the city. So the people that actually were touched were from every walk of life, every neighborhood. And it was really nice to have them be able to touch feel, because we took 4 pages, and by the time they were done, even myself, when I started with the survey, I didn't quite understand it at first. I've been in building, but when I got done with it, I actually changed my mind. So you just didn't know, but this really was a magic carpet walking in for us, because this is really what we were after. Trying to figure out what the community wants. It was exciting to tell them, what do you want? This isn't the city cramming it down your throat. This is us saying, here, you can have it, you can have a voice, and how can we help you understand it? So it was very, 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 productive and successful. Yes.
Also, you went around to all over the place before 2023. Because I remember you came to the diversity councils more than once. All 3 of them. To try to get people involved, and wanting to do the scenario thing, but also getting input. So I know that you didn't just go there, you went a lot of places.
And I do think, like, I really wanted to get about 600 to 800 people to respond to the survey, but it also ended up being over the holidays. And so we had to use the best methods we could in that scenario. So probably diminish some of our responses. People go out of town, people don't check their mail, all those things. But every round of engagement has had at least 200 more people than the previous round of engagement, which tells me every round is expanding the reach, which is also a challenge, because every round has to orient almost a third or 2/3 of the group as new participants. So that's really, I think, important. If we were just doing a survey, we would have done the prioritization thing that said we should fill with business as usual. Getting people engaged enough where they can take in all that information and expand their thinking into the space of future of the week is really challenging. And I don't know if these are going to be untested. These are what we put together in the preferred scenario. We'll have that 60-day review. And sometimes people don't show up until they have something they don't like that they want to react to. I mean, those are always our biggest council and board of supervisor meetings, are the ones where people are really like, I don't like this. So everybody will have a chance to look at it with that lens too. And I expect that'll be the biggest engagement round for sure.
And my thought about this is that there are a lot of voices that voiced concern. There were a lot of people that voiced concerns, but weren't. I'm thinking about what you did. And so, he spoke to a lot of people, and there was a lot of people approached. I spoke to a few people too that don't go to meetings, are old. They don't go out, and they don't even own a computer. And so there was really no way for them to be a part of it. And that was frustrating a little bit because, for example, the information that Abe got, and put a cuts that one time on pieces of paper. That was really valuable information from people that don't engage or don't own a computer. And so, you know, to your point, we had no way to put those voices in.
We will,
Really.
we will, but they just can't make this 1 week turnaround.
Right.
Right, like that's the thing, is all that information, the ambassadors are sending into us, but I can't get it incorporated in all the data for 1 week. And because we haven't done all the qualitative
Right.
work, and a lot of that is much more qualitative.
Yeah, exactly. And I know that opinions will go into as well, this person said this. Even though they didn't participate, we know they had an input on roads or bikes or whatever. Will those then be brought in? So we have.
In the next
Exactly.
iteration, yeah.
Yeah.
And we didn't like cut off comments because they didn't fit the model. Like we
Right.
put a model together to try and get people thinking, but if people gave us comments in this round, it didn't fit the pattern. We still are taking it and we'll find a way to get it shown in the qualitative responses.
Yeah, and not to belabor the point, but just one example to bring some more light onto this answer is the way that the city did their the process with the community members was a lot more open. For instance, I took the lead on a couple of neighborhood meetings, and it was more of kind of the way that you were thinking. It was so pointed that people were just going along with what I was saying by hand. As opposed to, and I saw the beauty in the way that the city did it because it gave them the opportunity to figure it out on their own. But to get that to, 8,000 or 50,000 people, so we're still struggling with that, and I'm hoping by 100 years from now, we'll have figured that out. Did we have any more online comments or questions for this portion?
I'm not seeing any in the chat.
Well, thank you, Elsa. And anybody else in the room want to speak to this topic?
I guess I just have one question, Sarah. I'm looking at desired outcome, initial direction on creating a composite scenario. I know we talked about this, but have we done what we hope to accomplish in this?
Not yet, and that's okay. I guess what I initially see from these results is that neighborhood infill is the strongest intuition of the community about what direction we should be heading. We heard in the qualitative responses what people were worried about with that. And a lot of it was displacement and flood hazard and some of those other things. And when we get to the point where we've done all the qualitative analysis and cross-tabbed it, we'll take that into account as we try and kind of develop a preferred scenario. But there was still quite a bit of support for urban centers and corridors that function as mixed-use places and activity centers, like we currently have identified in our plan. And so I don't think those are going away, but maybe we won't have 27 of them when we build the preferred scenario. Maybe we need to focus more on 10 to 15 of them that are really more central and more critical to the community composition. That's kind of what I walked away understanding from this, and I haven't gotten all the way through the data. But is that what you all see from at least this initial data? Is there something, I know I'm just showing it to you in like a flashy quick thing that I literally got Friday and sent out to you within a couple hours of receiving. But is there feedback or thoughts on that, or things you want us to take with us as we keep analyzing and come back with more?
I mean, I find it fascinating that the starting point of the data was the top value was housing that is more affordable, and the top priority was business as usual. And I find that cognitive dissonance is too common, that we want change, but we want to do the same thing and expect a different outcome. So I think the way this whole thing was structured to work through that and to keep drilling down to get people to, more, better understand it, was really well done. So kudos to you for the way that was designed. Neighborhood infill and urban corridors, personally, I was happy to see those up as 1 and 2, because I think that gets us closer to the priorities that were identified. And I just might say too, from my position as business owner downtown for the last 30 years and downtown resident, I don't know that a lot of people look at our downtown as urban, similar to maybe a big city like Phoenix or Los Angeles or anything. I think the very first slide you showed as a potential outline of this document had a picture of Aspen and San Francisco, and some version of that picture I feel shows up on almost every thing about Flagstaff, because we identify with that. And so when we're talking about urban corridors, and Michelle, as you know, City Council just approved the downtown vision plan after many years, and it calls for some catalytic projects, including housing and including some density, but not in those historic streets that we all picture and value and love. It's on the periphery, like Chase Bank, that was built in the 70s when people drove large Cadillacs and there were many people working at the bank. But now it's a huge parking lot and a huge bank with maybe 3 people working in it. I mean, so when we talk about urban centers and density as it relates back to the downtown plan, which I encourage you all to take a look at, I think that's what this is envisioning. I just wanted to say that, support it.
I'll go for it.
John, I think, John, that the interpretation I got out of that was, people would just like to be able to afford to do what they always do.
Yeah, true, yeah. Michelle?
Yeah, I just had a quick question. Are we going to get further updates as you process the data? I know it's not going to be on agendas.
I'll add it to agendas
Okay.
when it's available.
Thanks.
Yeah, so
I'm really
I hope you
curious.
get at least a couple updates between now and April, but it might not be this detailed.
Thanks.
Rick, I didn't want to leave you on it. Do you have anything for this portion? Or are we good? Good. And Tom, did you have anything? Okay. Great, that sounds good. Yeah, and then just to kind of piggyback off of John's point a little bit, I was thinking about this today while I was driving around just quickly. And it's like, I may be one of the least wealthy people in this room. Like I literally live paycheck to paycheck and have most of my life because of the jobs that I've taken on and stuff like that, opportunities that I have taken. And I'm, one of the happiest people I know, because when I look outside my window, there's that mountain staring at me. My playground is everywhere I go. And I think that the way that the city is really envisioning this plan moving forward is be able to keep as much of that as we can while we're still building and developing through the process. Because I could live the rest of my life not having money in my bank as long as I have the quality of life that we experience here in Flagstaff. I think that's a beautiful thing. I think when we start, competing that with, more money and more things and not being able to have, to be able to have that peace by seeing the view sheds, I think that's where we start turning Flagstaff into a place that's less sustainable for our grandchildren's grandchildren, so to speak. That being said, we'll be moving forward onto our next agenda item. And I was wondering, I wanted to ask the commission if we could move, if you guys agree to move public participation up one just for time constraints, since we do have a number of the public here that may want to. Yeah. Okay, and then the member of the public just did the old. No. So we'll keep that as a number 9 item, and we'll move to number 8, which is potential vision statements. And these are draft vision statements based on engagement from October 22nd to January, or October 2022 to January 2024. And the desired outcome is initial direction on creation of a draft vision or presentation to the commission in March.
And so for this one, in the interest of time and the fact that we're at 8, You received in your packet a page and a half of what looked like pretty concise vision statements. I don't know if anybody remembers that the current plan has like a vision for every chapter and a big vision statement that talks about the Colorado Plateau and all these things. Well, back when we did vision workshops in 2022, we asked the public, what would you write in your vision statement for the community? And then we kind of waited to see what this initial scenario choosing feedback looked like, so that we could kind of use that as a guide to work through that material. And Elsa, who is very new to the city since December, and she's our new associate planner, and has very fresh eyes, got to look through all this material and tried to condense it down to a couple example vision statements. And because we're running short on time tonight, I'd like to let us wrap up and get you guys out of here soon. What I'd like to ask is that the committee look at these vision statements and send me some written feedback before the next meeting. And I'll report back on what that looks like, and we can wrap up that conversation next time. We'll dive into the resource stewardship and resilience chapter. Is that a good proposal for how to tackle that one tonight? We got a lot of information and there's a lot to chew on, so this might be a good way to reflect back what we all heard and we're walking away with.
And what I like about Elsa's examples is there's some great sentence structures in there, just templates on things that we can build off of. Things, give us idea of how we can structure our own possibly, and filter those out in the one meetings.
Yeah, I'd like to offer an example that when we were doing the South Side plan, we'd written some draft vision statements. We were kind of at this step, and Kara House, who was a stakeholder group member and is now a counselor, just took it and like rewrote the whole thing, and she read it out loud. It was like, ta-da! And it went right. It was just there, and everybody got to that. So don't feel tied to these, like you're having to pick. If there's some like inspiration it gives you and you feel like you could write it better, send it in, let's talk about it. Like, but don't forget to go back maybe and look at those visioning workshops and the feedback we got from them, because that's kind of how we were developing the words and structure that we saw.
All right, so is there any thing online, Elsa, about this topic?
Nope.
Okay, so we'll just kind of, you guys do your homework on it. If you guys want to wordsmith it, send some ideas in, or pick one that you like, and staff will be happy to decipher that. Moving on to public participation, just for clarity and public's information, this is the time when, if you do show up in public or online, you can, ask to introduce yourself. That way we can get to know the people that are interested in the process. And tonight we do see one public participant here, and I would like that person to introduce themselves in case we see them in the pictures. That way we know who we're talking to out in the hallway and something about the planning process that you're interested in.
Hey, my name is Tyler Denham. I recognize most of the people around the room here because I have a habitual habit of showing up at things like this and commenting. I have a deep interest in housing affordability and sustainability issues, stemming from my personal experience of having members of my family and several of my friends be priced out of Flagstaff. And also I don't drive, I primarily bike around town, so that gets me very interested in transportation and related sustainability issues. And yeah, I'm really happy to be here listening in to a process of vital importance that Flagstaff's return.
Cool, Tyler. And Taylene?
I just want to say really quick that Tyler is really dedicated. The first meeting, the first regional plan meeting that I had planned at the library, I called and put the notice out and cancel it because of snow. And when I got there for the second meeting, this guy showed up and said, yeah, I rode my bike all the way down. It was so embarrassed. I didn't even want to get in my car, drive my car. He rode his bike down. And so thank you, Tyler.
Yeah, and just if there's members of the public that are online now, so everybody knows, we encourage written comment, and I would love to see some from you when the time is right, Tyler. Thank you. We'll be moving on to number 10, summary discussion overview of the next meeting. Sarah, I'm not sure what you have planned for this section.
Just any final thoughts from the committee on today's meeting? This is an opportunity, if we've had public comment and offered integration for that or anything else, but I have one quick thing to say about the next meeting, but first, anything to wrap up this one? Or somebody who held their thoughts and is ready to offer the last brilliant words on tonight's topics?
Derek, was that a hand up or was it?
Oh, no.
No, okay. I had a quick question for the committee. The public input that we had from Mr. Best. Did anybody want to discuss any of that right here, right now, or?
There's two public comments since the last meeting. One was the written one about having a health commission be a part of the regional plan process. And then the second is about whether we should have a strategy to include a plant ecologist for the city and county. So I know Mr. Ruggles sent me a very nice email with some well-researched things on that first topic of why can't we have a health commission? Would you like to
Tell you what,
include it into the record?
relative to that, I can make it very quick, just simply reading the email that I sent to Sarah.
Thanks.
And what I said was thanking for asking my opinion on this. You're at the open house from the school. The county established a public health services district in 2009 in accordance with ARS 48-5802. Board of Supervisors as the board of directors for that district. ARS 36-188 effectively preempts the city from having a board of health after the county creates the public health services district. This leaves regulatory authority, which I believe Sawdust was getting at. Use regulatory authority with Cook and Inlet County Public Health Services District and the Arizona Department of Health Services, and effectively preempts the city creating a health board or commission. There is no need to incorporate this as a goal with attendant policies and plan, since the county health district already exists. The comprehensive plan for the county, also addresses this in community services under the heading of public health goals and policies on pages 136 to 38. And it is covered very, very thoroughly. So that is the reason why there is not something like this currently in the regional plan, nor is there a need to incorporate a goal such as a health district or a health commission. One thing that has been suggested is the addition of a reference to what is in the county's comprehensive plan relative to this, because it really does a thorough job of covering the bases, and it covers the entire county as well as the city under statute. So that's it.
Well, that means there's nothing else to say, really, right?
Yep.
Kind of answered the question.
But we
You got
will
it.
share that comment just in, Melissa will share that comment within the county, so it gets to the right level. It's just not the right comment for this process.
So, right.
Could you share it to at least me, because I learned a lot.
Sure, I'm happy to forward John's email to the.
Matter of fact, if you'd like a copy of it, it's right here.
I just didn't want to like steal his thunder. He did the hard work.
Okay.
And then,
Make sure that
if you want to talk about the sign.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, I think, so my understanding from the comment we received is that there's the desire from the commenters to have a plant ecologist because they recognize the threat of invasive weeds in the community, both from fire and the ecological perspective has gotten much worse, rapidly worse in the last 10 years. I think that's something that Jessica Simmons, who's the wildlife biologist who works for the county, has chimed in on as well. It's a pretty.
As the county has a forest restoration director, which falls under the flood control district.
Correct.
Natural coalition. So
Right.
the county actually has staff that then interacts with the largest landowners in the county. They're not private property owners, they're fall through. Like that, really comprehensive plan, that would be to manage for those, parks, developments, are actually the ones. So it's the interaction with those agencies, from some kind of staff, including the wildlife planner and the forest restoration director, that achieve.
And there is a San Francisco Peaks Weed Management Area that's been established for all federal agencies and includes partnerships with private land. I think maybe those just aren't, though I think SOT knows kind of what they are. I don't think those are very well-known initiatives in the city and county. And I guess I read in the like hire someone. Sometimes people give us comments, they say hire someone. And I wish SOT was here to kind of chime in on this too. I'm sure he's gonna pay attention and follow up as well. And then I can see Rick's got a thought to add to this. They're saying there aren't enough resources, which we're building partnerships, but yeah, do we have enough resources to get ahead of it right now? No, you wouldn't even hear Jay Smith from the county make that claim. So it's a good phase. You know, when we get comments like this as planners, we often say that we want to understand the issue behind the position. And there's a lot of issues that this comment letter raises that I think will be relevant when we're looking at their resource stewardship and resilience chapter. And we're revising it right now too.
No, you got it. I was gonna ask just if we could reconsider later in the process.
Yeah,
I would like to see it moved a little bit from the theoretical more into the action planning, but I think Scott did a good job of getting us off the table.
I think it's worthy. It's definitely an issue worthy of us having a good discussion on it in the next chapter. So,
And then the information you were sharing about there's this and there's this and there's this, can that all be written down? You know, because I know SOC came up with this idea, it wasn't just his idea, it came through that, to a whole working group that we meeting for like 20 years. And it's like, the first time I heard about it, they dated in 17. They've been thinking about it a long time, we need to talk to him, so we have the information, kind of see it. So I agree with Rick.
I agree with that.
yeah, we can certainly invite SOC to make sure he speaks at the next meeting when we're talking about this chapter. And I'll reach out to him and see if he's available or if he wants to come in and talk to anybody. Yeah. Yeah, there's a last good question.
All right, Elsa, do we have any more online comments?
Nope, nothing in
or
the chat.
questions? Last call for comments or questions on this meeting. We're moving to number 11, which is miscellaneous to from commission. Does anybody have any miscellaneous to from? Sarah?
I just want to announce last week we concluded the review of the first chapter. First chapter is always a little rumbly because there's lots of pieces of it we're trying for the first time. So thank you to all the committee members who were part of that review. In a 10-page document, I received I counted up again today, 116 comments, and people responded to each other's comments, and they really dug in a lot of ways that are really useful. So I probably have to do a 15% rewrite of the first draft, which is great because I don't send out reviews to get everybody to say, yes, this is awesome. I send them out to get real feedback, and I want to say that the team internally at the city, at the county, and our partner agencies and the committee members really dug in and gave us a lot of great feedback. I'm not gonna necessarily attach to your agenda next time every comment we received, but I will provide like here are the major comment themes because I think it will make your eyes cross. It's pretty long, but if anybody would like to see that, I'd be happy to share them. I just don't think it's gonna be in the packet next time. But I can like walk through. So when I send out kind of the summary of the big comments and the second draft, that's really what you'll talk about at your meeting. If you want to understand what the originals look like, just let me know and I'd be glad to like send you kind of that snippet of them instead of sending you the whole thing. Is that an acceptable way to approach that? Because you're gonna have a lot to read. And I don't want to like make it more complicated.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to handle it. Tell great things to staff is important for our community scientists, particularly. And, nothing else online also for this comment?
Nope.
Sounds good. Well, that means that this meeting is adjourned and our next meeting will be Tuesday. Well, could you tell me what the next meeting will be?
Oh, sorry, my bad. It's gonna be Wednesday, February 21st at
this
6
building?
PM at this building online. I'll just remind people really quickly that if there are snow operations, this meeting will become fully online. So I may only have 24 hours notice of that, but like, we got lucky that the storm got pushed back a little into Thursday, but if today they needed us for snow operations, we would have been online totally. So just be prepared for that. It's winter. And thanks to the public works staff for sharing their space.
The online meeting, if you can't get online,